إِيمَانًا وَعَلَى رَبِّهِمْ يَتَوَكَّلُونَ. These ayat increase them in terms of iman, and they continue to place their trust in their master exclusively. Right? So the three things are put together by Allah Azza wa Jal. Now, so in other words, the first change of attitude, how do I know if I even have iman? Do I have these three things? And how do I know if I'm really counted among those who believe? When Allah is mentioned, what happens to my heart? When the ayat are mentioned, does my iman increase? Do I feel something? And especially the easiest gauge of that is the salah. Because Allah says to Musa alayhi salam, أَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِ, establish salah to remember me. The easiest gauge of iman is salah. And you know how connected salah and iman are. This will come up again later on today. But you know how connected salah and iman are? Allah Azza wa Jalla says in Surah Al-Baqarah, in terms of not wasting the deeds of the believers, Allah Azza wa Jalla mentions in the Quran, وَمَا كَانَ اللَّهُ لِيُضِيعَ إِيمَانَكُمْ. Allah would not be one to waste your iman. You know when the Qibla was changed? When the Qibla was changed, certain Bani Israel said, you've been praying in the wrong direction. None of that counted. None of that counted. And Allah responded, Allah would never be one to waste your prayer. But instead of using the word prayer, salah, what did He use? Iman in the meaning of prayer. He used it interchangeably. In other words, a sign of iman is what? Salah. And salah combines those three things. It's a sign of iman, it comprises the ayat of Allah, and it is the ultimate form of dhikr. أَقِمِ الصَّلَاةَ لِذِكْرِ. Subhanallah. How incredibly these things are interconnected with each other. This is a personal gauge for someone if they have iman or not. Yet last time I mentioned some fruits of iman. I'll complete that discussion today, inshallah ta'ala. But before I do, the second fallacy. The first fallacy was the assumption if we have iman or not. And if you don't want to check with anything else, just what you feel on the inside. These three things that we just mentioned. The second problem, the second common misconception is that iman has nothing to, once you have iman, you don't need action. You don't need any more deeds. They're two separate things. It's like an extra thing you're doing. You don't have to do it, and even without it, you can still have iman. They're separable. But actually what we're learning in this surah and many, many, many places in the Quran is that these two things are inseparable. You really can't separate iman from action. From a logical point of view, I'm not even going to give you a religious explanation. From a fairly simple, a logical point of view, if you really believe fire burns, if you really believe it burns, would you touch it? No. If you're convinced it's going to harm you, it will affect your behavior. If you really believe that going to your job is important, you believe that, you're convinced of that, you're going to go on time. If you don't think it's that important, you might slack off. So it entirely depends on what your action is now determined by what? You believe. That's a very simple thing to understand. So to disconnect these two things and say, yeah, I don't pray, but I still have iman. Or I don't concern myself too much about halal and haram. Or I don't concern myself too much with the commandments of Allah Azza wa Jal, but I still have iman. That's a fallacy. These two things are necessarily intertwined and connected. They're connected. And actually, Allah Azza wa Jal, sometimes He talks to the believers and He says, what kind of iman is this? What kind of iman do you people have? He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, lima taquluna ma la taf'alun. Those of you who have iman, why do you say what you don't do? The criticism in that ayah, you have iman, but what's not there? Action. What kind of iman is this that you don't have action? Similarly, He says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, ma lakum, idha qila lakum unfiru fi sabilillahi thaqaltum ila al-ard. In Surah At-Tawbah, He says, those of you who have iman, what's wrong with you? Whenever you're told, come forward in Allah's path, your feet get planted into the earth. You don't move forward. In other words, Allah is calling you to action by challenging whether or not you have iman. They're connected together. They're inseparable. So this change of attitude, before you think about anybody else, you and I have to experience this change of attitude. It's one thing to talk about this relationship in theory and to study it, and to talk about the different scholars who gave evidences, academic evidences for the relationship between iman and amal. But it's another to internalize that and say, my iman will not survive if I don't have actions. Now, one of the proofs of iman is inside, whether you feel it or not. What's the other proof of iman now? Actions. So, iman is proven now for yourself. Does your action reflect iman or no? That becomes a good formula for yourself and myself, whether or not the iman inside our hearts is manifest. By the way, in that same ayah where Allah told them, you don't have iman, you only have what? You only have Islam. Then He gave them hope. You want to get iman? وَإِن تُطِيعُوا اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ لَا يَلِتْكُم مِّنْ أَعْمَالِكُمْ شَيْئًا. If you continue to obey Allah and His Messenger, none of your deeds will be cancelled away. In other a'mal are mentioned. Right after he said, you don't quite have iman. But instead of saying, how do you get iman? What did He mention? Actions. In other words, He's giving them a clue. You want to get iman? Continue to obey Allah and His Messenger, and you will develop iman. It will go from Islam all the way to iman. May Allah grant all of us real iman. The final just side comment on the study of Quran and in regards to iman. It's a beautiful topic. It's a study like that could take years in and of itself. Just the study of iman in the Quran. But just one comment we'll make about that is the difference between two very common terms in the Quran that most Muslims don't pay much attention to. There's Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. You know that phrase, right? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu. Also alladhina amanu, those who believe. But then there's the phrase al-mu'minun or al-mu'minin, believers. So in English I'm saying those who believe, and then I'm saying what's the other phrase? Believers. What's the difference between these two things? First of all, note, one of them is verbal. There's a verb involved. Those who believe, now believe is a verb. Amanu is a fi'l al-madi. Okay, it's silatul mawsul for alladhina. It's a verb. Okay. When I say al-mu'minuna, believers, that is not a verb, that is a noun. Now rhetorically in Arabic, the difference between a noun and a verb is temporary. It's not stable, but a noun is permanent, fixed. When Allah says alladhina amanu, these are people whose iman may go up or down, and they may be weak iman, they may have weak iman, they may even only have Islam. They may not even have too much iman yet, but the larger category, broad statement is being made in a legal sense. But when Allah uses al-mu'minun, guess who He's referring to? The people of mature iman. Which is why you find, whenever you find in the Quran the phrase al-mu'minun, you will never find criticism of those people. You'll find elevated praise of those people that are called al-mu'minun. But when you find the phrase alladhina amanu, you may or may not find nice things. You may find Allah saying to them, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu aminu. Those of you who believe, believe. In other words, how that's been understood is, kunu mu'minin. Become true believers. Become real believers. And by the way, those who believe, alladhina amanu, not necessarily doing well. Because Allah says, why do you say what you don't do? Right? Not necessarily. But al-mu'minun, what does He say about them? قَدْ أَفْلَحَ al-mu'minun. Not alladhina amanu, but al-mu'minun. Those who've attained that mature iman, which necessarily leads to action, those people have already attained success. They're already, qad means already. They've already been successful. And notice, when Allah mentioned al-mu'minun, the entire passage deals with actions. الَّذِينَ هُمْ فِي صَلَاتِهِمْ خَاشِعُونَ وَالَّذِينَ هُمْ عَنِ اللَّغْوِ مُعْرِضُونَ. Actions, and starts with iman. And all these actions are mentioned. So you see that these two things become inseparable. May Allah Azza wa Jal include us among the mu'mineen. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is, inshallah ta'ala, the core facets of iman. The three core pillars of iman. First, I'd like to give a disclaimer. This is not a study of aqidah. Aqidah is a technical study. It's a study of theology. It's a study of how we interpret certain things in the sacred text in regards to metaphysics, the afterlife, the attributes of Allah Azza wa Jal. And it can even become sometimes a very philosophical kind of study, and a very technical and dry study. This is not a study of aqidah. This is a study of iman. We should keep these two things distinct. Though they have a relationship with each other, there's a fundamental difference. Aqidah is an intellectual study, and iman rests where? In the heart. So that's one fundamental difference between the two of them. Okay? But as far as iman is concerned, in simple terms, you can even explain this to a child this way. You can say that iman is basically, it comprises three fundamental pillars, or three fundamental facets. The first of them is iman in Allah. The second of them is iman in a message. And the third of them is iman in an afterlife. Okay? So in Arabic we say at-tawheed wal-risala wal-akhirah.